February 3rd, 2023, Norfolk Southern Train 32N on a journey from Madison, Illinois to Conway, Pennsylvania, is seen on the doorbell camera with sparks flying out under one of the cars. As the crew is notified of a hot axle by a railside detector, they begin to slow down and stop the train. Before they can fully stop, 38 of the 151 cars derail. Understanding the severity of the situation, the engineers immediately notify Norfolk Southern dispatchers, apply the handbrakes on the front two cars of the train, and pull the two locomotives about a mile down the line from the derailment. What the engineers did not know was what was actually in the cars. Of the 38 derailed cars, 11 contained hazardous materials, including chemicals such as ethylene glycol, ethyl hexyl acrylate, butyl acrylate, isobutylene, and vinyl chloride. Vinyl chloride is a flammable petrochemical used in the manufacturing of polymer polyvinyl chloride, or PVC. When exposed to heat, vinyl chloride can undergo a rapid polymerization reaction, an exothermic chemical process that can pose an explosion hazard, and thus is transported in heat and pressure-resistant tank cars, built up to Department of Transportation DOT 105 car standards for hazardous materials. Vinyl chloride accounted for 5 of the 11 derailed hazardous materials cars. To prevent exceeding pressure and temperature limits, which can lead to an explosion, DOT 105 tank cars have a built-in pressure valve that, when too high of a pressure or temperature is detected, will automatically vent some of the material in the car. Some of the cars carrying vinyl chloride had been slowly venting their stores automatically, but temperatures continued to slowly increase. When one of the cars saw a large rise in temperature, the authorities decided not to let the cars continue venting on their own and instead opted for a controlled release of the chemical. On February 6th, the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, and Norfolk Southern officials, along with Ohio Governor Mike DeWine and Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, gave a mandatory evacuation order to residents within a 1-by-2 mile area around the site. Once all residents were evacuated, officials began venting the vinyl chloride cars into a ditch next to the tracks. After all the vinyl chloride had been vented into the ditch, the chemical was ignited using flares and left to burn under the watch of the EPA. The explosion and subsequent fire created massive plumes of black smoke and pillars of fire that could be seen for dozens, if not hundreds of miles around. Though it was completely pre-planned and executed as safely as possible under watch from the NTSB, EPA, city and state government, and Norfolk Southern, something about an explosion this large taking place in rural America really caught the media's attention, and images of the explosion are now synonymous with the derailment itself. Unfortunately, a lot of people think this explosion was unintentional and it caused the derailment, which undermines the effort the NTSB and EPA put into disposing of the vinyl chloride as safely as possible. The problem is, burning off the vinyl chloride is really the only option to get rid of an amount as large as this, and authorities knew this going in. There are a lot of factors that can and should be questioned by residents and officials, but this explosion is not one of them. When the derailment occurred, the EPA required Norfolk Southern to pay for and handle all cleanup efforts. Of course, Norfolk Southern being a profit-making company, they don't necessarily care about the long-term impacts of this derailment, and thus have begun to cut corners. In town hall meetings and interviews, residents of East Palestine have begun to state that Norfolk Southern is contracting work to low-quality companies that are not being thorough and are possibly hiding the real results of tests. The even bigger problem with this whole derailment is the politics behind it. In 1900, there were 132 Class I railroads in the United States. Through consolidations, buyouts, and bankruptcies, there are now only 6. Union Pacific, BNSF, CPKC, Canadian National, CSX, and Norfolk Southern. Class I's dominate the railroad industry and account for over 90% of its annual revenue. In recent years, railroad workers and local communities have expressed safety concerns related to longer freight trains, and many recent accidents involving such trains are currently under investigation by the Federal Railroad Administration, or the FRA. The FRA does not currently place any limits on freight train length, and thus trains continue to get longer as technologies improve. The train that derailed in East Palestine was over 1.7 miles long. During the Obama administration, the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, or FAST Act, was passed into law. This act would require all trains deemed hazardous to be fitted with electronically controlled pneumatic brakes, or ECP brakes. During the Trump administration, multiple Class 1 railroads, including Norfolk Southern, lobbied to have this requirement removed, stating that there were safety benefits that did not outweigh the cost. In 2017, Trump repealed this requirement, and the Biden administration has not re-implemented it. However, though the train in this situation met the requirements to be classified as a hazardous train, as it had 21 cars containing hazardous materials, Norfolk Southern marked the consist of only having 3 hazardous materials cars, which would not meet the requirements that would have mandated it to have ECP brakes if it hadn't been repealed. Of course, even if all safety standards are upheld and cleanup efforts are done honestly and to the best of the agency's ability, an incident like this should never occur. Accidents like this one are the result of a lack of safety culture in the railroading industry, especially among Class 1 railroads. As the competition gets slimmer and slimmer, the ideology of maximizing profits becomes more and more appealing to the railroads. Now, we can throw around numbers and figures as much as we want, but the true cost of the Norfolk Southern derailment in East Palestine hasn't been discovered yet. Poisoned water and air, ignored symptoms, and dead animals are only the beginning of the lasting price the residents will have to pay. Norfolk Southern has already fumbled the ball, and the EPA is beginning to show signs that this environmental disaster might end up the same way as Flint, Michigan. Whatever the outcome, for the residents of one unlucky small town on the Ohio-Pennsylvania border, the damage has already been done. There's no amount of reparations that will fix that.